This seemingly innocent picture concealed a heartrending truth about a young boy's life. Dr. Rebecca Morgan, with gloved hands, carefully slid the aged photograph from its protective archival sleeve in Emory University's special collections. The sepia tones of the 1857 image spoke of a bygone era, revealing two boys posed on the porch of a stately southern home. On the left, a fair-haired boy, perhaps 8 years old, beamed in an impeccably tailored suit. He was William Harrison, the son of the plantation owner. Beside him stood another boy of similar age, Elijah, a black child dressed in formal attire that hung loosely on his slender frame, a stark contrast to William's finery. Just another staged plantation photograph, Rebecca murmured, familiar with the cruel custom of slaveholders documenting their human property alongside their own offspring. She was about to return the photograph to the archive when an anomaly in the lower right corner snagged her attention. Partially obscured at the very edge of the frame, almost as though unintentionally captured, lay a scrap of paper on the ground near Elijah's bare feet. It was slightly crumpled, as if it had been hastily discarded. Rebecca reached for her magnifying glass, a sense of foreboding rising within her. As the details swam into focus, she gasped. "My God!" she whispered, the air catching in her throat. It was a slave auction notice. The corner clearly showed a date, April 15, 1857, and fragments of chilling text. Healthy Negro boy, Elijah, age 8, suitable for house or field work. She frantically checked the photograph's date stamp. April 13, 1857, 2 days before the auction. A knot formed in her stomach. Rebecca's hands trembled as she turned the photograph over, her mind racing. On the back, written in elegant cursive, were the words, William with house boy, spring 1857. Below, in a different handwriting smaller and less practiced, were 2 more words. Remember Elijah? The black child in the photograph had a name, a past, a story that someone had desperately wanted preserved. His eyes, fixed directly on the camera, held none of the forced gaiety so typical of these plantation photographs. They were steady, resigned, and heartbreakingly aware. They spoke volumes about his impending fate. Rebecca knew immediately this was far more than just a historical artifact. It was a fragment of a life, a moment frozen in time, the last documented day of a child's life before being violently wrenched from everything he knew and loved. "We need to find out what happened to Elijah," she said, her voice laced with urgency, addressing her assistant, Daniel, who had been observing her with growing curiosity. "Someone wanted us to remember him. Now we will." Rebecca spread her research materials across the large oak table, the quiet of the archive broken only by the rustling of paper and the occasional scribbling of notes. Plantation records, auction documents, and digitized newspapers from 1857 Georgia filled the space. The photograph of the 2 boys sat squarely before her, Elijah's gaze seeming to follow her every move, a silent plea for justice. The plantation was Magnolia Creek, owned by the Harrison family, her assistant, Daniel, said, placing a digitized ledger beside the photograph. Financial records show they were struggling after the devastating cotton blight of 1856, selling slaves to cover their mounting debts. Rebecca nodded grimly, her heart sinking. It was a tragically common practice. Desperate plantation owners often viewed their enslaved people as mere commodities to be liquidated in times of financial hardship. A newspaper advertisement confirms the auction, Daniel continued. Estate sale at Wilkes County Courthouse. Negroes, livestock and furnishings of Magnolia Creek Plantation. April 15, 1857. Rebecca scanned the advertisement, her eyes falling upon the itemized list. Further down the list of items for sale, boy Elijah, age 8, house-trained, reads. The last 2 words struck her like a physical blow. He could read. Rebecca breathed, astonished. That was not only unusual but also strictly illegal in most southern states. The implications were enormous. She examined the photograph again, meticulously studying the careful positioning of the 2 boys. The white child, William Harrison, was undeniably centered and elevated slightly above Elijah. But something about the overall composition still felt off, deliberately staged. "The auction notice shouldn't be visible," she said, her voice barely a whisper. These photographs were meticulously planned and staged. It defied logic that they would allow such an incriminating piece of evidence to be included in the shot. Daniel nodded in agreement. "It's as if someone deliberately arranged for it to be in the frame," he said, his brow furrowed in thought. A quiet act of defiance? A silent protest? Their research led them to the photographer Frederick Simmons, one of the few itinerant photographers working in rural Georgia in the 1850s. His client list consisted primarily of wealthy plantation owners seeking to immortalize their families in portraits. "Most intriguing is this letter in Simmons's sparse records," Daniel said, handing Rebecca a fragile piece of paper. "It's addressed to an abolitionist newspaper in Boston." Rebecca read the carefully penned words aloud. "I send these images not for publication, as it would endanger many, but as evidence of what words alone cannot convey." He was documenting slavery while pretending to serve the plantation owners. Rebecca realized, her mind reeling. He was walking a dangerous tightrope. In a meticulously kept inventory of items sold at the auction, they finally found the chilling entry. Negro boy Elijah sold to James Fletcher of Charleston for $675. "We have a name and a destination," Rebecca said, her determination growing. "Now we need to find what became of him after he left Magnolia Creek. We owe him that much." The trail was thin but present, a fragile thread leading them toward Charleston and the next, unknown chapter in Elijah's life. Rebecca traveled to the Charleston Historical Society, where a recently donated collection of Frederick Simmons papers awaited her. The aging leather portfolio contained correspondence, receipts, and most valuably, his private journal. April 13, 1857, Rebecca read aloud, her voice echoing in the hushed reading room. Completed portraits at Magnolia Creek. Harrison boy typically demanding. The other child, Elijah, remained still as stone throughout. He knows what comes. A chill ran down her spine as she continued. The auction notice fell from Harrison's pocket during the sitting. I repositioned it slightly rather than removing it. Small acts of truth are all I can manage in these circumstances. Further entries revealed Simmons's growing moral conflict. the torment of earning his living photographing the very society he had come to despise. May 2nd, 1857. Another entry read, "Received word that my Magnolia Creek photograph has reached Boston safely. Contact there believes it may be useful to the cause, though I fear too late for the child." The photographer's desperation was palpable. He knew the photograph was a powerful tool, but doubted it would reach Elijah in time. Most significantly, Rebecca discovered Simmons had maintained a record of where his subjects ended up when possible. Next to Elijah, Magnolia Creek, he had written, "Sold to Fletcher, Charleston. Reported literate, dangerous knowledge." A knot tightened in Rebecca's stomach. The label dangerous knowledge spoke volumes about the dangers Elijah faced. Fletcher owned a shipping business, Daniel reported from his research, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He purchased several young slaves that year, ostensibly for his household but likely also as dock workers. Rebecca's investigation led her to Fletcher's business records, which included a detailed inventory of his household staff. Elijah appeared on the list as houseboy assigned to Mrs. Fletcher. Mrs. Emily Fletcher was involved with a women's reading society, Rebecca noted, reviewing the society's sparse records. Several members were quietly Northern sympathetic, though not openly abolitionist. "A household ledger contains a surprising entry from Mrs. Fletcher," Daniel said, pointing to the screen. "New boy showing aptitude with letters. Will continue instruction discreetly." She was continuing his education, Rebecca said, surprised. That was extremely unusual and risky. "Most revealing is this letter from Emily Fletcher to her sister in Philadelphia," Rebecca read aloud. "The child came to us already knowing his letters. Someone had clearly taught him, despite the laws against it. To extinguish such a light would be a greater sin than nurturing it in secret." The pieces were connecting, forming a far more complex and nuanced picture than Rebecca had initially imagined. A photographer documenting brutal truths, a child with forbidden knowledge, and a mistress making a dangerous choice. Elijah went from one unusual situation to another, she told Daniel. But what happened to him as the winds of war began to blow? Rebecca walked the narrow, cobblestone streets of Charleston's historic district, stopping before the three-story townhouse that once belonged to the Fletcher family. Now an upscale restaurant, there was nothing to mark its history as a place where a young enslaved boy with dangerous literacy had once lived. Fletcher's household records from 1858 to 1861 showed Elijah's position evolving from houseboy to personal servant to the Fletcher's son, George, who was 2 years older. This pairing of enslaved and owner's children was common, Rebecca explained to her department head via video call. The enslaved child would serve as companion and servant, often sleeping on a pallet in the child's room. "Most intriguing are entries in young George Fletcher's school primers discovered in a family collection," Daniel said. Alongside George's practiced handwriting were other practice sheets, less refined, but showing remarkable progress. Someone else had been using the same books. Emily Fletcher was teaching them both, Rebecca theorized, using her son's education as cover for teaching Elijah. The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 dramatically disrupted life in Charleston. James Fletcher's shipping business records showed mounting financial troubles as Union blockades tightened around southern ports. A ledger entry from October 1861 recorded, "Household reductions necessitated by war conditions. Staff reduced by half. Boy Elijah retained at Mrs. Fletcher's insistence despite financial advisability of sale. She protected him," Daniel noted, his voice filled with admiration. "More revealing is a diary entry from a neighbor's daughter, describing a Christmas gathering," Rebecca said. "Mrs. Fletcher's houseboy surprised everyone by playing a complex Bach piece on the pianoforte. Mr. Fletcher seemed displeased by the display, though others were impressed. The boy was promptly sent from the room. His education was expanding beyond basic literacy," Rebecca said, "which would have been increasingly dangerous as he grew older. The most significant discovery comes from a Confederate military dispatch dated June 1862, Daniel said. Suspected Underground Railroad activity near Fletcher residence. Household to be monitored for Northern sympathies." Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest. Shortly after, a police report noted, "Negro boy, approximately 13 years old, missing from Fletcher household. Suspected runaway, possibly harbored by Unionist sympathizers." Elijah escaped, Rebecca whispered, feeling an overwhelming sense of connection to the boy whose eyes had first drawn her into this investigation. But how and where did he go? In Philadelphia's Historical Society, Rebecca meticulously searched records of Underground Railroad activities. The network's secretive nature made documentation sparse, but certain patterns emerged. A Quaker journal from August 1862 mentioned receiving a young scholar from Charleston, aged approximately 13, showing remarkable aptitude despite limited formal instruction. Rebecca told Daniel over their research call. "That fits Elijah's description and timing perfectly." Daniel agreed. The journal belonged to Hannah Wells, a Quaker educator who operated a small school for freed and escaped enslaved people. Her coded records noted a new arrival, brought north via the coastline, a reference to the maritime escape route that used sympathetic ship captains to transport escapees. Emily Fletcher had connections to Philadelphia through her sister, Rebecca noted. She may have arranged his escape as Charleston became increasingly dangerous. School records from Wells Academy listed a student identified only as E, whose progress was noted as extraordinary, particularly in mathematics and music. A margin note added, "History of trauma evident. Nightmares continue." Most revealing is a letter from Wells to a colleague, Rebecca said, her voice catching with emotion. "Our young scholar from Charleston carries a photograph he keeps hidden from all but me. It shows him in his previous life, standing beside the son of his former owner. He says it reminds him daily of what awaits others still in bondage. He kept the photograph," Rebecca said, her voice filled with wonder. "The very one we're researching." By 1863, records showed E assisting with teaching younger students while continuing his own education. As the war intensified, Wells's journal noted, E expressed his desire to contribute to the Union cause. His knowledge of Charleston's geography and shipping could prove valuable, though I fear for his safety. The Union intelligence report from October 1863 mentioned, young Negro informant, formerly of Charleston, providing detailed information on Confederate shipping patterns and coastal fortifications. Intelligence deemed highly reliable. He became a spy, Daniel said, amazed. At 14, Rebecca nodded. Many formerly enslaved people did, using their intimate knowledge of Southern geography and customs to help Union forces, but most of their contributions went undocumented or deliberately obscured for their protection. As the war progressed toward its bloody conclusion, Elijah's trail led into increasingly dangerous territory and toward a momentous personal decision. Union military intelligence records from 1864 revealed E served as a guide for Union forces during operations along the South Carolina coast. His knowledge of Charleston's waterways and defenses proved invaluable during several missions. He risked everything, Rebecca said, studying the brief commendation, noting exceptional service by a young Negro guide formerly of Charleston. As Sherman's march cut through Georgia and the Carolinas, Elijah was attached to a unit documenting war damages and assisting formerly enslaved people fleeing plantations. A photograph from this period showed Union officers with several black scouts. One, a teenager standing slightly apart. His face and profile just recognizable from the earlier photograph. It's him, Rebecca confirmed. 5 years older, but unmistakable. Most poignant is a military chaplain's report describing a unit's return to a plantation near Magnolia Creek. Young Negro guide became visibly distressed upon approaching former residents, requested permission to search property records, which was granted. He retrieved several documents and a small wooden figure before the main house was burned. He went back, Daniel said, to reclaim pieces of his past. As the war ended, Elijah's trail led to a Freedmen's Bureau school in Charleston, the city he had fled, now transformed by defeat and occupation. Bureau records listed Elijah Freeman, age 16, as both student and teaching assistant. He took the surname Freeman, Rebecca noted. Many formerly enslaved people chose names reflecting their new status. The teacher's report praised his exceptional progress and natural teaching ability, while noting Carey's deep knowledge of both bondage and freedom that lends gravity to his interactions with both students and adults. Most significant was Elijah's application to a special program sponsoring promising Freedmen's Bureau students to continue education in northern institutions. In his own handwriting, careful and precise, he wrote, "I seek education not only for myself, but to ensure others like me will never again be denied the power of knowledge." His application included a personal reference from his former teacher, Hannah Wells, and surprisingly, a letter from Emily Fletcher, who had relocated to Philadelphia after her husband's financial ruin and death. "The boy Elijah, whom I once wrongfully held in bondage, deserves every opportunity denied him by an unjust system I regret participating in," she wrote. "His mind is remarkable, his character forged in circumstances no child should endure." She acknowledged her wrong, Rebecca said softly, and tried to make some amends. Elijah's application was accepted, opening the next chapter in his extraordinary journey. By 1868, Elijah Freeman was enrolled at Oberlin College in Ohio, one of the few institutions accepting black students. College records showed him studying education and history, maintaining excellent academic standing despite arriving with a fragmented formal education. His application essay has been preserved, Rebecca told Daniel as they reviewed digitized documents. "It's extraordinary." In eloquent handwriting, Elijah had written, "I carry within me 2 children. The enslaved boy who stood for a photograph, knowing he would be sold the next day, and the free man who now writes these words. Education is the bridge between these 2 selves and between our nation's shameful past and its possible future." A professor's note in his file observed, "Freeman brings unique perspective to historical discussions. When other students speak of slavery as an abstract concept, he quietly corrects factual misunderstandings with first-hand knowledge that silences the classroom." Elijah's college years revealed his growing interest in photography and documentation. He apprenticed with a local photographer while studying, learning the technical aspects of the medium that had first captured his image as a child. Most revealing was his thesis topic, photographic evidence, documentation as resistance in American slavery. His advisor's comments noted, "Freeman's analysis of how enslaved people and their allies used visual documentation to expose the realities of slavery is groundbreaking, informed by personal experience few scholars possess." After graduation in 1872, Elijah accepted a teaching position at a freedmen's school in Washington, D.C., where education records showed him introducing innovative methods, including using photography to document student progress and community development. He transformed the medium that once objectified him into a tool for empowerment, Rebecca observed. A newspaper article from 1875 mentioned Professor E. Freeman's photographic exhibition at Howard University, documenting the rapid advancement of colored schools throughout the South. Most significant was Elijah's growing collection of photographs and documents related to formerly enslaved people's experiences, personal testimonies, family reunifications, educational achievements, or creating what he called, in a letter, an archive of freedom to balance the overwhelming documentation of bondage. He was creating a counter-narrative, Rebecca explained to her department. While most historical documentation of slavery came from the perspective of slave owners, Elijah was preserving the experiences and achievements of the formerly enslaved. As his reputation grew, so did his mission to preserve these stories before they disappeared from living memory. By the 1880s, Professor Elijah Freeman had established the Freeman Historical Collection at Howard University, one of the first archives dedicated to documenting African-American experiences from the perspective of the communities themselves. His approach was revolutionary, Rebecca explained during her presentation to museum curators. While most institutions collected plantation records and slave owner accounts, Freeman focused on gathering personal narratives, photographs, and documents from formerly enslaved people. Newspaper accounts described Freeman traveling throughout the South, carrying his camera and recording equipment to document elderly, formerly enslaved people's stories before they were lost. A journal entry revealed his urgency. Each passing year claims more voices that can speak directly of bondage. Their testimonies must be preserved if future generations are to understand the full human cost of slavery. Most poignant was Freeman's return to Charleston in 1885 to document the former Fletcher household, Daniel said, showing Rebecca the digitized records. He interviewed remaining community members who remembered the antebellum period. His field notes recorded, "Standing before the house where I once served produces a storm of emotions I cannot fully capture in words. The boy I was would never have imagined the man I've become, returning with a professor's title and the freedom to document rather than be documented." During this trip, Freeman also visited Magnolia Creek Plantation, now abandoned and decaying. His photograph of the ruined main house was captioned, where William played while I awaited sale, both of us children yet worlds apart. His most significant work came in documenting Reconstruction's achievements and subsequent challenges as Southern states began implementing Jim Crow laws. Freeman's photographs and writings created a vital historical record of this pivotal period, capturing both progress and backlash. He understood he was witnessing crucial historical transitions, Rebecca noted, and that dominant narratives would likely erase or distort them without proper documentation. By the 1890s, Freeman had compiled an extraordinary archive that challenged the emerging lost cause mythology romanticizing the antebellum South. His collection included the original photograph from Magnolia Creek, the image that had started his journey and now served as a powerful teaching tool in his lectures about slavery's reality. When asked by a student why he kept the painful photograph, Freeman reportedly answered, "Because the auction notice in the corner tells a truth many wish to forget, and the eyes of that child remind me daily of our obligation to remember." In 1901, at age 52, Professor Freeman received an unexpected letter that would lead to an extraordinary reunion. The letter, postmarked from Boston, read, "Dear Professor Freeman, I believe you may be the boy Elijah from my father's photograph taken at Magnolia Creek in 1857. I am William Harrison, Jr., and I have spent years wondering what became of you." Rebecca discovered this correspondence in Freeman's archive papers along with his careful draft response. "Mr. Harrison, your letter has found the boy from that photograph, though he exists now only in memory. The man who writes to you today would welcome a meeting, though I wonder what you seek from such an encounter." After several exchanges, they arranged to meet at Howard University, where Freeman had insisted the reunion take place, "on grounds where I am professor, not property," as he wrote to a colleague. A photographer documented their meeting, the former plantation heir, now a businessman in his 50s, and the former enslaved child, now a distinguished academic. The photograph showed two middle-aged men seated in Freeman's office, surrounded by books and historical artifacts. Freeman's journal entry afterward was revealing. "Harrison remembers our childhood differently, recalls us as playmates, despite the vast chasm between our circumstances. Yet, he seems genuinely interested in understanding. He brought his father's plantation journals, which contain information about my parents, information I never knew. For this alone, the discomfort of our meeting was worthwhile." Most significant was what William Harrison revealed about the photograph itself. His father had commissioned it specifically because Elijah was to be sold, a remembrance of a child William had grown attached to. The auction notice had indeed fallen accidentally into the frame, but the photographer had noticed and subtly ensured it remained visible. "The photograph that documented my sale became the evidence that preserved my memory," Freeman wrote, "and now completes a circle neither the photographer nor my former masters could have imagined." After their meeting, Harrison donated his family's plantation records to Freeman's collection, an unprecedented transfer of historical materials that allowed Freeman to document aspects of plantation life rarely accessible to black historians of the period. Freeman's collection grew to include this remarkable correspondence and reunion documentation, which he framed as evidence that history is not merely what happened, but our continuing relationship with the past, a conversation across time that can occasionally bend toward reconciliation and truth. In the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, Rebecca stood before the newly installed exhibition documenting Professor Elijah Freeman and the photographic record of freedom. The original Magnolia Creek photograph held the central position, the image of a child about to be sold, now properly contextualized within the extraordinary life that followed. Beside it hung Freeman's own photographs documenting Reconstruction, education initiatives, and formerly enslaved people's testimonies. "What moves me most," Rebecca told the gathering of historians and descendants at the exhibition opening, "is how Freeman transformed documentation from a tool of objectification into one of empowerment and historical preservation." The exhibition traced Freeman's remarkable journey from enslaved child to educator, photographer, and pioneering historian. His Freeman collection had grown into one of the most significant archives of African American experience, preserving countless voices that might otherwise have been lost. Most powerful was the section displaying Freeman's own reflections on the meaning of his life's work, written in 1910. "I began as a subject of history photographed as property, documented in ledgers and auction notices. I will end as an author of history, having created an archive that future generations may use to understand not just what was done to us, but what we did, thought, created, and dreamed despite it all." Among the attendees were descendants of both the Freeman and Harrison families, the living legacy of both the enslaved and enslaver, now united in honoring a shared if painful history. Elizabeth Freeman Davis, Elijah's great-granddaughter and a historian herself, stood before the original photograph that had started it all. "My great-grandfather would be proud to see his work continuing," she told Rebecca, "not just preserving the past, but using it to understand our present." As visitors moved through the exhibition, many paused longest before the original photograph, studying the auction notice in the corner, and the knowing eyes of the child, who would transform his documentation into a lifelong mission of historical preservation and truth-telling. The small boy from Magnolia Creek Plantation, positioned as a prop in a white child's portrait, had indeed been remembered not as property to be sold, but as a pioneer who ensured that enslaved people's experiences would be documented in their full humanity, complexity, and truth. Through the power of a single photograph and the remarkable life that followed, visitors could trace a path from objectification to agency, from property to professor, revealing a story of resilience and reclamation that had almost been lost to history.